thank you for inviting me also, because to say that I'm happy to be here and to present my work is a huge understatement. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to discuss with you. So hopefully this short presentation will give you an overview of my work, because I use translation languages a lot in the digital world. So I will try and give an overview of that today. So first of all, I wanted to start by talking about the way I use social media and the way I use it in a bilingual way. So the first thing I wanted to mention is Facebook. Facebook is probably the one tool I use the most, and what I aim to do is to translate pretty much everything that I post on Facebook. If it's a status about what I've done that day, for instance, I try and translate it. So if I post first in English, I will translate it into French. If I post in French, translate it into English. But it's also true of quotes, because I put a lot of quotes online. I'm an avid reader, so I try and translate those. I will give you a few examples, but so Facebook to me I really use as a bilingual platform in that sense, which is a bit different with Twitter, for instance. So Twitter I've used more recently, so I think I started a year after using Facebook as a writer. And on Twitter, I don't translate every single tweet, like for instance I would do for Facebook mostly. But I use both languages. I tweet in both English and French. So depending who I'm talking to or who I want to address, then I'm going to use one language over the other. But also I have a very playful approach to languages on Twitter, because then I will come back to this. But I think it's a fabulous platform for Oulipian games. So games coming from the Oulipo style movement in France. Then there is Instagram. I put that there because well, it gives us a bit of color, and also because I've just started to use it. So actually I'm an Instagram baby. So I've started using it for the Nerds project. So the project that Erica mentioned, for which I received, I was really happy to receive the DOT Award for Digital Literature. And so it's a very visual project. So obviously I wanted to be on Instagram as well for that. I will explain more in a minute. And I use blogging a lot. So I'm on WordPress, and I've got 3 blogs actually on WordPress, so with different plans, and I don't use them in the same way, but there you go. So the first one, and I think you've mentioned them all, is Predicted Prose. So it started as a blog to publish screenshots of online searches. So that's why it's called Predicted Prose, because I would start typing something in a web browser, and then it would suggest, as it does, a few searches. So I would take screenshots of that. But then, because I received a very positive response for one text I had written on there, it also started to become a blog where I talk about OCD, mental health, depression, and stuff like this. Also because the way I look at online searches with this obsessive quest for words links to, for instance, a visual representation of OCD in the digital world. So I thought that was interesting to see it that way. And on telper.com, telper means literally like father in English, and so it's on father-daughter relationship. So here it's texts and a few images, but no screenshots there. On both these blogs, Predicted Prose and Telper, I try to these are bilingual, as in every single article that I write I will translate. So for Predicted Prose I write first in English, and I then self-translate it into French. And for Telper, which is why I chose a French title, it's the opposite. I write in French and then I translate it into English. I will show you how you access both texts, but all the texts there are accessible in both languages. For Nerds projects, it's quite different, because it's it's a blog I use so that people can contribute their ideas. The ideas behind the Nerds project is that it's to create, so it's an ambitious project, but a visual encyclopedia of the collective imagination. So to use a very famous piece of work, so be it a book, be it a TV show or a film, and to ask people what image first comes to mind when you think about it. So for instance, if I tell you The Shining, if I tell you Frankenstein, if I tell you The Color Purple, these are the first three, what images come to mind, and then you can post it. So you can either post it on Facebook, on Twitter, or on Instagram, and then I will share them through on those social media, but also I will put them all together on the one website, the Nerds project. So the hashtag will always be Nerds, The Shining, Nerds, Frankenstein, Nerds, The Color Purple, and so on. So on that one, even though I encourage people from all different backgrounds and cultures to contribute, the website itself is so far, anyway, only in English. So this is my birth certificate on Facebook, and I thought I would start with this because so I became or I admitted I was Lou Sarabadzic, as you can say, le 3 septembre 2014. So on the 3rd of September 2014, and that's why in my title for this presentation I chose Né Lou Sarabadzic. I chose Né for three reasons. First of all, because I want to totally embrace and reclaim the narcissism that usually people criticize us for when we use the digital world. So no problem at all. You tell us we're narcissistic, so I will start by that. Also, I use it because, well, in terms of languages, it's very interesting because it's a French word, but it's used in English to express someone's maiden name. So I'm not married, so it's not a maiden name for me, but it's I used my mom's maiden name, which is Sarabadzic, because that's why I put my so my official name is Virginie Sauzon there, and I used the first letter of my official name, the S, and then my mom's maiden name, Sarabadzic, to create Sarabadzic Lou. I chose because for many reasons, and for people I really admire, and I'm sure you have your ideas already, but also because I like the way that it works in French and English, and it's not female, it's not male, it can be both, no problem. So I love the ambiguity, so linguistically and in terms of gender, and for many other reasons. So as you can tell by me explaining the story there, it's no big secret. I didn't use a pseudonym or a writing name to in a way have a virtual identity that could protect my real one, because I see it as a real identity as well. It's my real face. It's who I am. But I wanted to create that to signify the ambiguity between cultures at first. And this is my first post on Facebook. So actually one day after, I explained why I created that online profile, that Facebook profile, because I used to have one with my official name, which I barely used, to be fair. I didn't write anything, whereas this one I use a lot, as my friends on Facebook can tell. And here I explained, and this also explained to people why I wanted to give myself a new name for this, because I was about to write extensively about mental health, OCD, depression, and grief, and I thought that not only to protect me, but to protect the people that are dear to me, my family, my friends. To them, it would be easier if I used a different name, so that they can put, should they wish, a little bit of distance, and maybe have this as a way to not see it as pure autobiography. So this is what I've written for that first post. I finally decided to not make a secret out of it. Severe depression, yes, one which I only admitted last year. Years of just being a mess, but experiencing this can precisely make you more positive. So because now what matters is to have a laugh, right exchange with people, and put things into perspective. Now, for the sake of the truth, I didn't correct any typos. I've started a blog, and you've already noticed it. Here's my new identity too. Welcome to predictedprose.com, and above all, thank you. So this was my first blog. So you can tell that you can see that the post I posted once in French, and I posted one in English as well, because there are the website is accessible in both languages. A few hours later, just for fun, I put online this map that you can see when you have a WordPress blog to tell you who visits your blogs. And this one, I just said to me it looks like a friendship map, so that was really moving to me. You can see that there's the UK and France there. Obviously it makes much sense. I've been living in the UK for 8 years and I come from France, so obviously to see them there, I can see my relatives, I can see my close friends, but also I can see the friends I've made in very different countries, so Germany, United States, Burkina Faso, Netherlands. So I really wanted to highlight that from the start, because it was really important. A month later I also did it to show that, well, this time France was first, so as competitive as we are, I wanted to put it there. Also because again, very, very close friends coming from or who were living in different countries were following me from Turkey, Germany, United States, and so Brazil, Singapore, Belgium. So it was all very very touching for me. So I wanted to show this to people and to celebrate, to thank them for reading me from all of these places. Every time I think about it, it amazes me. It still amazes me today. So I love it. So why do I use Facebook? I said that I use Facebook a lot, and to me Facebook is very important for interactions. So for interacting with people, for creating a community of readers, not necessarily readers of my text as you're about to see, but of text in general, to celebrate reading, writing, creativity and learning. So these are all so important to me, and with a huge emphasis on on translation. First of all, for instance, I often post links to projects that I think would be of interest to my friends. So usually they are about languages or translation. This one, for instance, so Guillaume Vissac is my publisher and a very good friend, and he has this very, very interesting project on translation. He translates James Joyce's Ulysses one sentence at a time, so one sentence per day he publishes. So it's going to take years, as you can imagine. It has already taken years, so bear with us. But yeah, I find it's a very interesting project in literary translation. So I wanted to put it there because many of my friends, they read both English and French. Also, I use Facebook to give away books, and books in both French and English, because I love the fact that, for instance, if you're, for instance, say you have a basic understanding of English, maybe you're not going to spend money, I don't know, to buy a book in English, say, for instance. But if someone gives one to you, well, maybe it's going to encourage you to actually read more in English, and why not? Likewise for French, and also just because I love books, and I have to, if I kept all the books that I read, I couldn't live in my home anymore. So yeah, it's a great way for me to and also to talk about literature with like-minded people. The other thing I do on Facebook in terms of interaction and this celebrating reading, writing, creativity and so on, is to ask for feedback, because so that's what I love about social media and the digital world, is that you can actually interact with your readers on a day-to-day basis. So obviously I very often engage in public discussion or in private discussion. Some people don't feel comfortable putting a comment, for instance, but they will contact you in private, and I find I'm always very extremely grateful for the time they take to share all this. And for instance, this one I put because well, it was before coming to this workshop here, to this symposium. I said, okay, so I'm about to talk about my bilingual writing practice in Lancaster. Is there anything that you would like to say? What aspect of my bilingual practice do you find most useful? Or I don't know, would you still have access to a text if it was only in one language? What do you think? These kind of things. And so may my friends be thanked for this, because they were very generous in their comments, both publicly and through private messaging. And the three main things I would say that were highlighted by their messages was one that indeed, even though it was an intuition for me, but that what they liked about the bilingual post and things like that, like this one, for instance, is in both languages, is that for many of them they actually have access only to one language of the two, so they would not have access to my work or my political statements or even my silly life about, I don't know, going to the shops or whatever, if I only wrote in one language. So I'm glad for that, because I want to be as inclusive as I can, knowing that obviously it's only French and English, so obviously many people would still be excluded, but at least I can include as much as I can. The other thing that they said is that, and that was really interesting to me, because that's certainly something I do myself, because I've got many friends who actually speak or read both languages. They actually like to have a look at both. So usually they have their language that they read first. So usually it's the original. So usually people told me they don't really mind if it's English or French. They read the first one by default, but then they're gonna have a look and see the translation choices. And I really like that, because it's one of the reasons why I use it, and when I find Facebook so interesting, because on Facebook, for instance, you can edit your statuses, things like that. So very often I'm going to have a discussion about, why didn't you translate this like this? And because there is no right or wrong translation, but only choices, then I can decide to update it accordingly and things like that. So that, and the last thing, there is still the playful aspect of languages. So for instance, the screenshots, I'm going to show you more in a minute, but the screenshots, for instance, which are not a pure translation, as you will see, but more playing on languages, then people like that. Yes, it was not an academic exercise in translation. So again, thank you to all my friends who contributed to this reflection. On Facebook, I post many quotes. It's true also of Twitter, but for instance, as I said, on Twitter I don't translate. I usually don't anyway. On Facebook, I really try to translate every single quote that I put, especially if it's a book I've read in English. I translate it into French. As I said, some of my friends, they don't speak English, but I think they would still be interested in the things I read, because I use it a bit as a reading diary, maybe. So it shows my influences, but also it can give them ideas, or I don't know, maybe I love to promote great writers. So obviously it can contribute to that. Here you've got an example of, for instance, the graphic novel Black Panther, Nation Under Our Feet, and so I've just translated that image. Then there is below that you will see another graphic novel called Notes on a Thesis by Tiffaine Rivière. This one I put, it's an interesting one, because it was actually written in French, I believe, translated into English. I read the English one, and they then translated back to French for this. I don't always do that. I'm going to give you an example of something else on the next slide. But this one, because it was a short sentence, and because it made sense, because it was academia and so on, I thought I could. Anyway, anyone who's been to a French conference will understand this. It's the hostility you feel when you've given a paper and you're waiting for questions at the end. Needless to say, my friends working in French studies in the UK adored it. They thought it was it was really true. Then there is another example that I gave. I've read that very powerful young adult novel, which I highly recommend, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It's about the Black Lives Matter movement. So here I usually don't really use hashtags on Facebook. I keep them for Twitter, or Instagram. But here, for obvious reasons, I wanted to use it. It has become known through that hashtag. It's quite important, and so that people could immediately see what it was about. And I translated it into French, because the discussions, we certainly need to have it in French as well. And I'm hoping that books like these are going to be translated real soon, to be honest. There you have other examples of literary quotes that I would put. So the first one, for instance, it was up to 2016, I think. So for the first 2 years I used Facebook, I actually tried and translate every single literary quote. So that means if a book was written in English, I would try to translate. I would translate it into English, even though French is my first language. So here, for instance, you've got an example with Olivia Rosenthal, Toutes les femmes sont des aliens, so written in French, and I offered my own English translation. Now there is always the problem of the imposter syndrome and the legitimacy surrounding translation, so I actually stopped doing that for a while. I don't know if I will come back to it. It's nothing that people have told me, you know, oh, you shouldn't do that, or what. But I had this legitimacy crisis, I believe. So I stopped doing it. But it gives you an example. The second one, the one below that, you will see is actually okay. It's one of these cases where I've read the book, because I don't mind reading in translation, and I mean, I know some people sometimes tell me, oh, but you don't mind reading something that's been written in French in English? Well, actually, I don't so much, because I love seeing translation choices, as I said. So it's always interesting for me to see. So, for instance, this very interesting book, Translation as Transhumance, which has, I think the French is Traduire comme transhumer, by Mireille Ganzer. So I really liked it, and because it's about translation, I wanted to put it out there. But this time, okay, especially because it was a translator being translated, I thought it was far too meta. I'm not going to go into that. So I asked people at the end of the translation, at the end of the quote, I only put the quote in English, and I asked at the end if you have the original, because I tried to order it online, and so sadly I didn't have a response from the publisher, so I couldn't. So if you have the original, if you don't mind sending me that version, and I can then post it as well. And then the last example with regards to French into English translation is a book from Delphine de Vigan, and so I've read it in English again, but so because I wanted to no, I've read it, sorry, so that's the French version, and it has been translated in English already. So I didn't use my own translation, I didn't need to. I just looked for the official translation, which is by George Miller. So that's another way of putting that. I also use Facebook and social media a lot to talk about political, how much to what extent translation is political. And for instance, in December, you will probably remember that cover from the Times, where they gave the status of Person of the Year to the silence breakers. Now, I was quite upset as a feminist translator, because in many newspapers, French-speaking newspapers, they've chosen to use the masculine form of silence breakers, so les briseurs de silence. Because in French you may or may not know that there is no neutral, so it's either male or female. Obviously, as they like to say, male include females, right? So it wins over. So if we use the masculine, it also includes the women. Well, that's fair enough, but actually for that movement, I think it was a huge mistake politically, because well, the silence breakers, first of all, really were women, and we needed to celebrate them, and certainly because they've been brave enough to do it, I think it's fair to give them that platform first. And why not for once have the female form include the male silence breakers. I also use Facebook for another page that I started, which is called Philosoph Stories. And so on that, I explore the visual culture. You can tell I'm interested in visual culture as well. The culture of memes. So when you see pictures with just usually the same font being used to translate, to give a message. These ones I use albums on Facebook to actually create some sort of comic strips. So if you go through the pictures, it would tell you a story. So they're about racism, homophobia, I've done about sexism, things like that. And all of them, as you can tell, that's why you can see the picture twice, is because I do one in French, one in English, but they're usually translation. The Nerds Project, so that's the one, so just so that you have an idea what it looks like. So this is, for instance, the pictures I received for The Shining. So you can see that some are pure creation, so people took their own shots. You can see a drawing, you can see pictures that have been borrowed from different websites. You see parodies, you see recreations. So that's an example. And because, as I said, the website is in English on Facebook, I was really careful at first to actually give the a presentation of what it would be in French, so that if people would like to contribute, they still can, they understand what I'm after. So that was the post that I put on Facebook to explain that in French. Now Twitter, I said that I used it a lot for Olympian Games. So there is the French way. So I use a hashtag I created, which is Proverbe le remix, which is literally translated as Proverbs the remix. And so I take two proverbs, I mix them up, and then I post the final result. So I'm not gonna go through the French ones because of course only some of you will have access to it, but I do the same for the English one through the hashtag pop phrases remix. So for instance, when in Rome, do as the sword. The pen is mightier than Romans. Here we've got, I mixed three of them. Revenge is the best medicine. Laughter is a dish best served cold. And faith is the sincerest form of flattery. And lately I've done some more with wisdom abridged. So actually, instead of mixing them, I take a proverb that already, or saying that already exists, and I just miss out a few words. So for instance, you can't make an omelette. People who live in glass houses should not, and when in Rome, do. So that's the wisdom abridged for you. So as you can tell, I don't translate those, but I like to have fun in both language. And now for predicted prose, a few screenshots. So that's how it started. So you can see I use DuckDuckGo. I'm going to explain why in a second. But this is an example of the screenshots that I post online. It was one comic per day. Now I don't post every day. And then I told you that after a while it also became a platform for publishing text about OCD, depression, and so on. So you have an example here with guilt. You can see in the tag cloud as well that I use both languages. It really interests me that for some words, obviously, the translation is the same. So for instance, depression is dépression, so I only miss out the accent, and that's why there's no both words in the tag cloud. But for instance, for OCD, you have OCD in English and TOC in French, or for mort, for grief, you have death and deuil. So anyway, you can tell how this plays with translation as well. So this is how, when you go to my website, this is what it looks like. You have the text. So this one, guilt, for instance. If you click on the French flag, you then have access to the French version, coupable. So how depression saved my life. You click on the French flag, and again you have access to comment la dépression m'a sauvé la vie. So I try to make it as intuitive as I can. This on Tel Père is the same, but as I said, it's the opposite way. So I start writing in French, and then I translate it in English. So here the flag is not French, it's the British flag. So if you want to access the English version, that's where you click. And I've started to use DuckDuckGo for predicted prose because actually it doesn't track its users, therefore allowing a search not to be defined by anterior searches. So this was quite interesting, especially since I didn't want all my habits to appear to all my readers. So this is what it looked like at first. So that's the very first day I used screenshots with both languages. There was always one at the top in English, one at the bottom in French. So both of them would appear. So that's what they appear, but so that you can read them better, there they are. So for instance, sometimes it's just pure translation. Like this one, for instance, I typed bienvenue, welcome to, so it's the translation, and then even the diary entry that I wrote on them is a translation. Aujourd'hui j'ai commencé un blog, today I started a blog. Okay, so nothing major there, but sometimes because the search was not as funny in one language and the other, it's not actually an actual translation. I changed it to match what I wanted to create. So for instance, here, even though the English is typing words makes me, in French I said chercher des trucs sur internet c'est si, which means searching things on the internet is so, because I thought that typing words makes me. In French it wasn't what I came up with was not great. Sometimes I love how something so close can give you so different results. So for instance, for how to, you can tell that in English you have a wide variety of activities here. How to lose weight fast, how to tie a tie, how to train your dragon, how to write a resume, how to get a passport, how to start a business, how to draw, how to deactivate Facebook account. Now I'm afraid the French version is very much focused around sexuality and cookery, because it's how to make love. There is the tie as well, okay, but and how to make crepes. So I just thought that. So obviously, people reading both languages will find something, but you can also read only one of them and still find things that amuse you or I don't know, make you sad. I don't know. I like the fact that it can also show that references are so well known in pop culture, especially. Like for instance, when you type life is, so in French, la vie c'est, even though all the other ones are pretty different, there is still that reference to Forrest Gump, the movie. Life is like a box of chocolate. And there is the same in French, la vie c'est comme une boîte de chocolat, at the same place. So I thought, okay, that's just interesting to see how we navigate between languages. Sometimes I love that using a translation is not sufficient for writing in French, because the internet will still impose English onto me. So for instance, here I wanted to write housework. So in French I used corvée, but instead of corvée, about the ironing and hoovering and so on, it was all about curves. So it was fitness. So I must admit it still was physical activity, but it was quite different indeed. So that's an example where I can't escape the English. Even though I set language to French every time, of course, I changed it. Here you can tell that the diary entries are actually changing depending on what I found through the online searches. So, for instance, you can tell that here. So I apologize for the guys. Guys are jerks, players, idiots. Waffles, girls are spaghetti. So I used that waffles in the diary entry. Wrote a short essay on guys, then on quotes, then on waffles. And then for the French one, les hommes were not waffles, but they were wine. So men sont comme les vins, les hommes sont comme les vins, are like wine. So this time it's almost a translation, except for the last word, which is vin, wine, instead of waffle. So just to show you how it works there. And sometimes also a good reminder when you navigate through languages on the internet, and especially DuckDuckGo, which is an interactive platform where they ask users to submit translation. You can tell that it's not the French from France. Here you have an example for proof of. When you type proof of, preuve de, you have two examples which clearly were submitted by users in Quebec. So preuve de résidence au Québec, preuve de citoyenneté canadienne. And so I really liked this as a reminder. France is not the only country submitting their translation, are they? Then I stopped. So now it looks more like this. I use only one screenshot. So one day it's English, the other day it will be French, but I alternate. So they are no longer on the same page, and there is no longer a diary entry. Now it's just this and the title. So here people were quite excited by the narrative. And again, I could give you some other examples, but I think we're coming to an end. Of examples where I used both French and English. So in a way, I'm talking about all this. So when am I monolingual? Well, when I publish books. So I've published 2 books that were published only in French so far, because I'm hoping one day they will exist in English. And sometimes when, especially with regards to feminism, when I post when I write articles for Facebook, and actually I want to address French readers, because in the UK they are beyond that. They don't. I'm sorry to say, but yeah, they are not arguing about that anymore. Like for instance, the Me Too movement, it was widely accepted in English-speaking countries, whereas in France it was, oh my God, you can't be so cruel to men and so on. So I wanted to address their specific French-speaking readers. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry.